we ready? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact the health and safety of our community. In an effort to be diligent, the city is continuing to conduct all public meetings virtually using the Zoom platform and live stream through YouTube. Access information can be located on the city's website and on each meeting agenda. I call to order the meeting of March 7th, 2022 at 6:01 p.m. And if you could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic that stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Invocation. I will call on Pam Osborne. Do I see her?
Mayor, I don't see her in the
Don't
audience
see
tonight.
her, so, okay. Well, we'll move on. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Potato,
Here.
Brown,
Here.
Cole,
Here.
Hochstetter,
Here.
Newman,
Here.
Reed,
Here.
Stewart.
Here.
All right, we're all here. Moving on to the consent agenda. Michelle, could you read the consent agenda?
Item number 1, approval of the checks and electronic payments in the amount of $2,219,763.29. Item 2, approval of the minutes from the February 22nd regular council meeting and the 28th of February study session. Item 3, purchase and sale agreement 14415 29th Street East, Buck.
Great. Can I get a motion from Deputy Mayor Hochstetter?
Yes, I move we accept the consent agenda as read.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded by Councilmember Newman. Would any council member like to remove one of the items? Anybody want to remove anything? Seeing none? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All in favor? All right. We have no public hearing tonight and no unfinished business. We're going to move on to public comment. And the public was encouraged to submit their comments to the city clerk by email before tonight's meeting. So the clerk may read those emails received into the record. Michelle, were there any comments received?
No, Mayor, there were not.
Does any public listening or watching have any comments they'd like to make regarding any items not on the agenda? Anybody want to speak on anything not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none. We have one item on new business, and it is ordinance number 2800 authorizing condemnation for new public works operation facility. And we have Attorney Marquez up here.
Mayor Hayden, would you like to for me to make the motion?
Hey, how about that? Can I have a motion from Deputy Mayor Hochstetter?
Yes, I move to approve ordinance number 2800 authorizing the city to initiate and pursue condemnation proceedings related to the acquisition of 14403 29th Street East for use in the new public works operation facility.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion by Councilmember Botetto. Now we'll call for City Attorney Marquez.
Before you tonight is ordinance
It's not on here. Technical difficulties. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. We're having technical difficulties. Before you tonight is ordinance 2800, and it authorizes condemnation of 14403 29th Street East. The design of the new Public Works Operations Facility identified a total of 6 lots necessary for the project, 4 which are south of 29th Street East, and 2 that are north of 29th Street. The parcel subject to tonight's ordinance is 14403 29th Street, and it is the final parcel necessary for the project. The city reached agreement for the purchase of the 5 other parcels. The Constitution provides the city with the authority to use eminent domain to acquire private property for public purposes upon the payment of what's called just compensation. However, it's always the city's last resort to pursue condemnation. And the city will continue to pursue negotiations to acquire this property short of litigation and in good faith. But should those negotiations reach an impasse, or should the negotiations delay the project, the city is requesting council authorization to pursue condemnation for this necessary property. If you have any questions about this ordinance, I'd be happy to answer them.
Do we have any questions for Andrea? No questions? Seeing none. Do we have any input from the public? We do have one. We have Digna and Ming. Would you like to comment on this? Would you like to comment on this?
Yes, hold on just a moment.
Okay.
Thank you.
There you
Hi, hello.
go. Hi.
My name is, can I go ahead and talk?
Yes, please do.
Okay, my name is Digna Cabrera, and I'm the owner of the 14403 29th Street East that you are at the agenda tonight for the authorizing legal action for the condemnation proceeding for my property. So my family has owned and occupied this property for over 30 years. And I purchased this property from my father in 2019. And I live in Montana with my husband, but my brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews live on the property, which serves as a family homestead. My nieces and nephews all went through public school in Sumner, and 3 of them are actually college graduates now, and 1 is a nurse now. So anyway, my daughter also live in Washington, and my grandchildren. And so we often stay in Sumner when we go visit my my granddaughter, my grandkids, and my daughter. And my family still continues to live on that property up to these days, and they pay me little rent to just offset some expenses. But the rent they're paying is not a market rate rent. And so it would be impossible for them to find a rental property that is comparable to what they pay me in rent. Prior to the city informing me of this condemnation, I actually had plans to build a multi-family unit in that property for my own use and my family. And so I would prefer, and also my family would prefer, to continue to live in this property. But unfortunately, probably won't be able to realize it because the city needs it for its public work facility project. So what I want is a fair price for this property, so I can actually purchase a different property somewhere near Sumner to continue to use for myself and my family. I did not think that the city's initial offer of 575,000 in the fall was a fair price because the current assessed value for my property is 576,600. So I'm asking all of you is to encourage the city's representative to make a fair offer, and hopefully I can, with the offer, I can buy a property that my family and I can use in Sumner. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay,
Mayor, I believe that he'd like to speak as well.
oh, okay. Mr. Cabrera, go ahead. You're good. You can go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Ming Cabrera. I am Digna's husband. We've been married for over 36 years, and it's been a very family-filled family. That is one of the reasons why we purchased this property on 29th Street from my Digna's father when this house was declining. So we could make sure our family could continue to live on that property and in Sumner. My wife and my concern is the ability to take the money we receive from the city for this property and find a comparable housing for our family in the Sumner community. Why I am talking about is to ask city to encourage the representatives handling this negotiation to make an offer on our property at a price comparable to the purchase price the city has agreed to with other neighbors for this same project. For example, more than 2 years ago, the city purchased our neighbor Kelly Stevens' property for $850,000. This property was larger than ours, but did not have a home on it, with a barn, a shed, a place to build a garden for family welding and for repairs on our property. The city paid for that property was approximately 82% higher than the assessed value at our time. Your first offer that they gave the representative was less than the assessed value. As a matter of fact, the next price that the city agreed to was only 6% of the assessed value of $612,000. And tonight, the city is going to put on the agenda, after approval of the condemnation of our property and approval of purchase of our neighbors right next to ours at 14415 29th Street East, the city is paying our neighbor $750,000 for their property, which is 76% higher than the assessed value of 425%. Again, ours is only 6% of the assessed value, and the first time they offered was less than the assessed value. And my family has been living there for over 30 years and have farmed it, have been there even before it was a rhubarb patch. So we can't understand why this assessed value was so low compared to some people are getting 156% of their assessed value. If the city agreed to pay 76% higher than the current assessed value for our property, the sale price would be over $1 million. Sometimes it's not just the size of the dog that matters, but it's what the people do with their property. As I've mentioned, it has a garden, it's provided a family. We've had people graduate, we've had kids in the Sumner system for over 30 years on this property with my brothers-in-laws and sister-in-law living in that property. It will be difficult for anywhere in the present day, especially with the prices today, to find something comparable to what we have in Sumner. And to fix cars, to play, to fix our vehicles, to do what we have. Again, it's never been the intention to move or even find a place that can
3
even
minutes is
compete with this type of value. So please, City Council, please instruct the representative, 76%, 156, and then you're offering us 6% of our assessed value. Something is wrong here. I don't know, maybe
Sarah.
we're just immigrants, but thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. do you have any more comments on?
I don't have any
We
follow-up.
had, one of the members of the household was trying to talk, but I don't think he can. Ross Castillo, if you can put him on, I don't know.
Is there other members of the public that would like to speak?
No, it was them.
No, it sounds like there's another gentleman in the,
In there. No, that's him.
Ross Castillo, is he in the waiting room?
Yes,
He should be in the participants tab.
Are we ready?
Bear with us here. We'll get him up on the screen.
thank you. Appreciate it.
Does he have to select yes to be upgraded to a participant?
We're working, guys. Ross? Ross? Can you hear me? I'm looking for Ross here. Who wants to speak? Can you hear me? No.
Ross, you can go ahead and speak if you want. Go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead, Ross. You're
State your
on.
name. Can you state your name, please? And you'll have 3 minutes. Ross, go ahead and state your name and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you want to speak on this. Where's Ross?
Doesn't sound like the audio is working. Yeah, I just wonder.
You're muted, Ross. There you go. No?
Can you unmute him? Okay.
Okay,
He could email the council with his comments.
okay, so Ross, you can email the council with your comments if you like. And we'll continue on. So. All right. All right, so. Is there any discussion, any more discussion with the council members on this? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Newman, Councilmember Newman,
No.
Reed,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Potato,
Yes.
Cole,
No.
Stewart,
Yes.
Hochstetter,
Yes.
Passes 5-2. Okay, so we're moving on to reports. I will call on, how about Councilmember Botetto?
Yeah, I'm just happy the days are getting longer, but other than that, I don't have any report.
Thank you. Councilmember Cole.
Yes, I have one item. I just received version 2 of the Rainier Communication Commission's interlocal agreement, and they've asked that it be routed to the right people within the city to provide comments, and those comments would be due by March 15th. I don't really know who those individuals might be, so I will talk to Jeff Stephens about it, about who would be interested in providing comments and then circulate it, and I'm guessing by the end of the day tomorrow. That's it for me. Thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes, congrats to the Sumner women's basketball team.
Yay.
It was an awesome year. They made it to the championship. Very competitive. And at the final buzzer, they were down by 2. But what a great season.
Yay. All right, Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. I wanted to echo Councilmember Brown's comments about Sumner basketball, and also for Sumner Middle School band, they had an ensemble rating at Glacier Junior High in Puyallup on Saturday, and the entire band did an amazing job.
All right. Yay. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Yeah, congratulations to the women's basketball team from the high school. And I wanted to also thank the maintenance people who cleared the trail of all the mud that the flood brought in the last week or so. It's still quite muddy, but they did a wonderful job, and the river really rose high under the overpass. But it's open now. So thank you very much for the good work.
Deputy Mayor Hochstetter.
Nothing today. Thank you.
Okay. And we'll have a report from City Administrator Jason Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. I gotta say, it's been a long 2 years since I've been standing here and feels very different tonight. So I'm happy to be here. Coming up at next week's study session, we'll have EPIC, which is our emergency management group that represents East Pierce County, here to give a presentation on what they've been working on, including the upcoming Lahar evacuation drill that's coming up at the end of April. The police department will be here giving us an update on the body worn cameras. And then Public Works will be giving an update on the 6-year transportation improvement plan, as well as a capital improvement project update for everything they're working on. At our next regular council meeting on March 21st, we'll be holding a public hearing regarding that 6-year transportation improvement plan. And council will consider 3 different ordinances. One of them, which amends the zoning code related to senior housing. That's on the special study session agenda for tonight, as well as an ordinance amending the 2022 comprehensive, compensation schedule. And then another ordinance amending the biennial budget for 2022 Q1. Following the regular council meeting on March 21st, we'll be holding a special study session to conduct some Public Records Act training and social media training. In other news, as you can tell, this is our first hybrid meeting that we've held. Over the coming weeks, we plan to gradually increase the number of elected officials and staff that are attending in person, and the public is welcome to attend in person or virtually. And virtual access to council meetings will remain an option for the public into the future. This Thursday, the Sumner Main Street Association is holding their annual membership meeting, and council is invited to attend that. And if you are interested in doing so, please contact Lana Hoover by noon tomorrow so she can RSVP and provide public notice if it is required. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I have one thing to announce, that our own community development director was awarded at the Chamber Gala at Pioneer Park for the Sumner Puyallup Chamber of Commerce, the Public Official, the Public Official Partner Award. Say that 3 times, wow. And it is for advocacy, collaboration, chamber support, economic development, and he was an exemplary partner to the chamber. So congratulations, Brian Windish. Thank you for all your hard work. We have no executive session tonight, although we are having a study session after this. So hang tight for a couple minutes so we can get things set to go for the study session and we can switch over. With no further business to the council, the meeting is adjourned. Okay. I have one issue here. Ready? Okay. I call to order our special study session, and all members are present. Our first item on the agenda is multifamily tax exemption for affordable housing.
Mayor, I can give an update to that before we turn it over to
Thank you.
Mr. Windish. Council, tonight we are following up on a study session presentation for multifamily tax exemption. You may recall that last year, council adopted a housing action plan and subsequently adopted a resolution setting the staff priorities on how to implement that plan. In phase 1, one of the priorities was to explore an expansion of our multifamily tax exemption, particularly related to affordable housing components. So staff tonight is here to present a follow-up presentation to that study session from last month and continue to answer council's questions regarding that. It is important that we get some feedback from you tonight. Staff is ready to move this forward to an agenda for your consideration, if that is your desire. And looks like we actually lost our camera, so we're gonna need to wait for just a moment to get them back up for our chambers. And then we'll turn it over to Mr. Windish.
Okay, are we ready?
No, you don't have a camera yet, Mayor. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Windish for his presentation.
Right, thank you, Jason. Good evening, Mayor Hayden and council. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I can make this work with my PowerPoint. Oh boy. Can everybody see that? Very good. All right. So multifamily tax exemptions. This is a similar presentation I gave a couple of weeks ago. And the objective for the multifamily tax exemption And this is really just focused on affordable housing. And it's an incentive to allow for the increase in the options for developing affordable housing for low and moderate income households. And I can't say that enough, that this is an incentive. Really, I think this is one of the best tools we have in the toolbox for developers to take a look at options they have for building affordable housing as compared to, say, a requirement, which is called typically inclusionary zoning, a requirement to build a certain percentage of affordable housing. This is a carrot for development and expansion. And what is an MFTE? It's an exemption from an increase in the assessed valuation of improvements, an exemption from the ad valorem property tax. And for the affordable side of this, it's a 12-year or a 20-year exemption. And the 8-year is for market rate. And we're not talking about that tonight. We're talking about a 12 or 20-year option. And I wanted to show this diagram just to kind of underscore what we're talking about when we talk about affordability. Typically, a place is an affordable house that you can afford at any income if you're paying no more than 30% of your gross household income towards that housing. Once you start to pay more than that, it begins to cut into other essentials in life, whether that's transportation or healthcare or food or everything else. And if you're paying more than 30%, you're considered to be an overburdened household. You're paying more than you should be from an affordability standpoint. And when we took a look at and when the council adopted the housing action plan, one of the documents leading up to that was a housing needs assessment that the city completed. Our consultants worked on it and completed. And in that document, it shows how many households in Sumner are cost burdened. And for renter households, at least 37% are cost burdened. So they are paying more than 30% of their income towards housing. And 13% are severely cost burdened, which is households paying more than 50% of their income towards their rent. Homeownership is lower with around 12, 13% cost burdened and severely cost burdened. The reason mortgages are lower is because you go through a process to become qualified for a mortgage, right? And that can help make sure that your mortgage is affordable and not just kind of left to the market to deal with it there. So we have some affordability issues in Sumner in terms of cost burdened households, both renter and owner occupied. The housing needs assessment also had this diagram, which is honestly a lot of date in terms of rent levels. It has the average rent in Sumner at $1,305. If you do what I did this afternoon and you Google Sumner rents, average rents, apartments.com will tell you that our average rent right now is $1,584. So we all know rents and housing values have gone up over the last couple of years. So what this shows is the households earning a certain percentage of the average median income. As low income is considered households earning at the most 50% of the average median income. Moderate are households earning 80% of the average median income. And you get above that, you get to those earning 100%, 120% of the average median income. So those are income levels across the top. And then as you move down, it shows you at the next level what monthly rent those income levels could afford if they are affordable. And then the next line down shows you what the home sales prices are for a mortgage, to be able to pay a mortgage that would be affordable at those income levels. And then the last line shows kind of what types of jobs pay these types of earnings. So as the senior center aide, I think this was in Bonnie Lake, right around $40,000 a year. A permit tech, $56,000, $57,000 a year. An income assistant engineer, $81,000, and a market analysis, $94,000. So this gives you an idea of what types of folks working in the community can afford what types of housing in the community. And I think it's important to note that these are not single person households. These are households based on a family of 4. So you wouldn't be renting a studio apartment, for example. You'd be trying to rent a 3-bedroom apartment, more than likely. And the other bit of information that I wanted to share with the council is from some census data from 2019, showing the difference. And I thought this was fascinating, and I actually am not surprised that this is what the census data shows. So this shows the census tract basically on the north of Main Street, and then it drops down to Meade-Macomber and then north of Meade-Macomber. So the census tract generally north of Meade-Macomber, north of Main Street. The median household income in 2019 for that census tract was $51,772 per year. And on the south side of Main Street, including down to south of 410, down the Riverbrook neighborhood, median household income at $77,183 per year. And the reason I want to show this slide is when we look at the area that we wanted to expand the allowance for a multifamily tax exemption, is mainly in that area where you actually have the lower household incomes. So this is the area that we are proposing to expand the multifamily tax exemption for affordable housing. And we already allow the Mfte in the town center, which is this area in orange, and we allow it for both market rate and affordable. The green area is where we'd like to expand it. That's the proposal, and it would be for affordable housing only, which would allow for the 12-year or the 20-year. And a lot of this property is zoned, it's all zoned for either multifamily or commercial, which would allow for multifamily as well. And much of it is zoned in the East Sumner neighborhood area, is zoned for multifamily, where we're getting a lot of interest. We're having a lot of development permits. And in fact, I contacted one of the developers last week and said, we are looking at expanding the multifamily tax exemption for affordable housing, which would require the developer to set aside at least 20% of the units to be affordable to those in the low and moderate income range. The developer said, yeah, I'm interested. They do this in Seattle. They do this in other jurisdictions around the state. I'm interested. And I got a follow-up from his staff this morning asking me about more details. When is this going to come into effect? And it sounded like they are planning on about 162 units. So if you did 20% of that, you're looking at 32 to 33 affordable units. So that's the kind of an impact that this multifamily tax exemption could have for developers who are looking at building in the next year, honestly. So I mentioned, and I'll just jump to the next slide. Whoops. Sorry, I'm bouncing around here a little too much. So I want to talk about the 12-year exemption again, in order to qualify for the multifamily tax exemption, the developer has to set aside 20% of the units that are affordable to the low and moderate income households. There's some reporting required and auditing required to make sure that that is exactly what they are doing. And it does not apply to any commercial aspects of the building. So if you had a multifamily building that had commercial on the ground floor, it was mixed use building, the commercial would still be assessed at normal rates. Only the residential portion would be exempt. The 20-year exemption even raises the bar further. It requires that 25% of the units, it must be and be available for a permanent, affordable home ownership or rental situation. I went back and reread the code to try to understand what they mean by home ownership, but it looks like the most important thing is that the units have to be managed, they have to be sold to a qualified nonprofit or local government partner, and then they ensure that at least 25% of the units remain affordable to low and moderate income households. The other 75% can be put on the market and sold at market rate. And they have a transitional requirement that even if those units transition in ownership, that it remains affordable. And I showed this slide last time to kind of illustrate for the 12-year MFTE for city revenue. I added that to this because there were some questions about that. So if you had a typical project, land value about 1.6 million, they do 8.9 million in improvements, ends up being about 10.5 million in total valuation. You know, what is the impact to the city's revenues over the next 12 years if that exemption is in place? And it's about total of about $117,318. And then the 20-year, of course, would be more years exempt. So a larger number of revenue lost, $200,652 of city tax revenue. So staff's recommendation is to adopt the MFTE, as I had said earlier, for both the 12-year and 20-year exemption option. And as I had said earlier, this is really the best option we have for incentivizing the ability to build affordable units for low and moderate income households. There's other things the city's going to do and are going to be looking at in terms of actions. We'll be talking about senior housing, of course, but in terms of developers coming in, or either they're building new or they're renovating and expanding on existing properties, this is really the best option we have for providing an incentive that has developers actually constructing and renting and managing units that are affordable to our households. So, and finally, the plan is to get some direction tonight and then bring it back for action, hopefully in April. So, happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Windisch. Do we have any questions? Councilmember Newman.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Ryan, I was wondering if you have any idea about how this is playing out in application in other jurisdictions, like whether developers are, like, first of all, whether they're taking advantage of it, and if they are they, is there a big difference between how many are taking advantage of, like, say, like 8-year versus 20-year?
The 20-year is a new option. So the difference, so if I were to go to Tacoma and look, and I haven't done this honestly, and look at like the 8-year, 12-year comparison, I don't know what that looks like. But what I do know is it's popular, that's for sure. And Tacoma's, I think, a great example. They've got a lot of projects that are doing this. But it doesn't, there are other smaller jurisdictions that have it in place as well. I showed a list last time other jurisdictions that have it. And I was just talking with a planner from Olympia last week. They've had it in place, and until they actually put the MFTE in place, they weren't seeing the kind of development they wanted to see in their downtown. And once that came into effect, they were able to see a lot of development in the downtown. I would also want to add that even if they develop like in our town center, if you develop under the 8-year program and it's market rate, you're still adding supply, which is not a bad thing, right? Supply and demand, it helps to add that supply. But I don't have a hard and fast answer to the question, kind of what's the comparison between, say, the 8-year and the 12-year tonight.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Botetto.
Does this have any effect on other, like the fire department, the library, or schools? Is this
Yes.
only, so can you address that?
Yeah, this would affect the entire ad valorem property tax, including not just city portion of that property tax, but also schools, parks, fire district, utilities.
So that sounds like a bigger chunk of money than just what is the city's impact. And so I don't know. It just seems bigger than what I thought initially. I thought it was just the city. So. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. And matter of fact, that was one of my questions as well that Councilmember Botetto mentioned is, do we know the ballpark or estimated impact to the other taxing jurisdictions? Or is that something that we could get? I don't, if we don't have it now. My other question is on enforceability. So in the event that these are granted and let's say it's a 100-unit complex and they only offer 10 affordable units. Yes, I understand they're reporting it. They're filing a report. I think you said annually. Is there an audit of those reports? Is there a verification to verify what they're reporting is accurate?
Yes, there's a pretty lengthy description in the bill and in the law as to what their annual reporting would be, and then they're audited at a minimum every 5 years. And so there's definitely oversight both at the city level in terms of receiving those reports, and then we report to Commerce, State Department of Commerce, and then they would be asking questions and doing their necessary auditing as well.
Okay, do you know if it's a point in time audit or is it an audit for the entire 5-year cycle?
I'm not sure. I just know that they have to go into all the details in terms of, who's renting the properties, what their income is, what the rent they're paying. I mean, they're looking at all those details.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So keep in mind, council members, that Mr. Windisch is looking for a direction to go. Also, if you kind of feel like you know where you are, or make a suggestion for him to bring something back to you, that would be helpful for him. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. Ryan, I've got a couple of questions. First of all, we talked about the reporting and the auditing. Is that something that our staff is going to do, or is that somebody who does that?
It would be the Department of Commerce would ultimately be the ones to come back for enforcing it.
Okay, and do you have any idea what enforcement looks like if they don't meet the minimum required requirements?
I don't know specifically. There's definitely penalties that would come back on them. It's laid out in the state law. I just I can't remember what they are exactly offhand, but there's definitely an audit. And then if they aren't in compliance, there's follow-up penalties that would cost the developer money for sure.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot for that. Being a finance guy, I'm concerned about the loss of revenue, and not just for the city, but for the other jurisdictions as well. But as far as the city's concerned, have you talked to the finance people as far as how we can make up that money? I mean, we can't just cut it out of the budget. So we're going to have to do something to make up for that loss of revenue. Do you have any idea what that might look like?
I have not had those conversations yet.
Okay. And well, I guess that's all my questions for now. And as it stands, I would not be in favor of this because of the impact of the loss of revenue to not just our jurisdiction, but the others that benefit from our tax dollars.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, do you have something?
Yes, Mayor. We do have CFO Raymond in the meeting. If we need to upgrade her, we can certainly do that to answer finance questions. And then also, Mr. Windish, please also touch on the changes to our comprehensive planning requirements that we have for affordable housing as it relates to MFT expansion.
Yes, thank you. Jason, I forgot to mention that. So last year, we were working through some amendments that were required from House Bill 1220 that was adopted in 2021. And we were working through emergency housing and emergency housing shelter requirements. In that same bill, there were amendments made to the Growth Management Act as it pertains to the affordable housing goals. And instead of it saying a jurisdiction should encourage the availability of affordable housing, it now is saying that we are required to plan for and accommodate housing for all economic segments of the community. And then further down in that same bill, they get very specific about our planning needs to address low and moderate income households. And my point with all of this is we will need to be able to demonstrate and show how the city is planning for and accommodating affordable housing for low and moderate income households. And so I guess when we look at the tools in the toolbox and things that we're going to be required to do from that law alone, the city needs to be serious about how do we, accommodate that. And we've seen a number of bills come through the legislature this last session and the previous session, really focused on increasing housing density requirements and other measures, accessory dwelling units and other measures to try and bolster the supply of housing and improve the affordability of housing. So I think that's the reason Jason wanted me to bring this up, is because we are really going to have to be able to answer at some point in our comp plan to the state how we're accommodating this. And as I've said a couple of times, this is one of the best tools we have. I'm happy to come back with revenue details and taxing details so that the council has a better picture of that. But this topic isn't going away. We're going to have to figure out some solutions that we'll need to adopt.
Councilmember Cole.
Hi, first of all, I'll start by saying that I am definitely pro affordable housing, but I do have concerns about how this would affect other jurisdictions, in particular the fire department, schools, library. Can you for sure bring back to us information on what that effect would be for those entities?
Yes, what I would probably do is come back with kind of a range of potential developments and their assessed values, kind of like I did with the $10.5 million project. And so that council could have an understanding of, okay, if this project goes forward and it uses the MFTE, what's the loss in revenue, quite frankly, for those 12 years or 20 years. So that would be my approach if that works for council.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Councilmember Hochstetter.
Thank you, Mayor Hayden. I'm not in favor of expanding the MFTE area. We have a large area that's already dedicated to that around the town center, which I think is appropriate for where it belongs. The part that bothers me is delaying the taxes. Not only for ourselves, the city gets the smallest piece of the pie. It's for the other services. These are long periods of time. 12 to 20 years is a long time. I feel like we are going to make use of all the other tools we have, our senior housing, our ADUs, other types of things. I think there's other things available to us that we don't need to expand out further into this delaying of the collecting of the property tax. So thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Yes, I believe affordability is really important. And then also, Ryan, so a developer would be paying taxes on the value of the land. Is that right?
That's correct. They'd be paying taxes on the value of the land pre-development. The land value, or if it had a commercial component, they would still pay taxes on the commercial component, property tax, but not on the multifamily component.
Now, when taxes go up each year, will they pay the increased land tax?
Yes, on the land, they would.
Yes, all right. Thank you. I'm in favor.
Councilmember Potato.
Yeah, I have another question. So like on the map that shows the green areas, do you have any idea how many potential developments, we're looking at, and, like the economic impact not collecting the taxes would be? So, you can come back at another time probably.
Yes, I can. I can tell you that the East Sumner neighborhood area has the most potential for future units. And right now, I think we have 500 units or something in the works. And the other areas are much more infill, kind of onesie twosie sort of things. But the bulk of what's going to get built in the next few years will be in East Sumner. And I'm happy to come back with more defined numbers in that regard.
Okay, that would help me. So I don't know, at this point, I'm a little uncertain which way I want to go, so.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. Just had a couple of follow-ups and a comment. I'll start with the comment. Ryan, I don't doubt for a minute that this is coming whether the city approves it or not in some fashion or another. But as you're gathering more information, a couple of things that I'd also like to consider or look at is the impact that it's had on additional or subsequent levies and bonds, if there's a way to track that. My concern is that any revenues that are lost from these developments is going to be shifted on to the other existing taxpayers within the city through higher bonds and levies to make up for the difference. Because those services for East Pierce, for example, are still going to have to provide regardless of whether they received a deduction or not. So I'd like to see a more broad comparison of the financial impact, not just to the builder, but to the communities that they build in and how much of that potentially gets offset. And then my other question is, does this also apply to builders that have already vested or already started the process here in town? So would they be able to then modify their permits and their requests to be part of this?
Yeah, it's my understanding, even if they've already applied for building permits, that if there's an ability to get through the exemption process, before they actually start renting units, that they could qualify still. It's just a matter of, once they're ready to rent, if they have the exemption, then we can figure it out.
Have any of the existing projects requested this or asked for eligibility?
Nobody's requested it, except, and I don't want to confuse things, but the Red Apple Market site,
Mhm.
the Dobler Properties who are building that, they are planning on taking advantage of the 8-year exemption, which is for market rate. So that's not an affordable project, that's market rate. So they are definitely taking advantage of that as far as I know. So those are, but as far as affordable housing, like in East Sumner, as I had mentioned, I reached out to one of the developers, asked if they'd be interested. They sound like they would be, but that's the only one I've had get back to me.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and as far as direction, I'm still undecided. I think that the 12-year has merit, but I have some concerns about the downstream financial impacts that I'd like to know more about.
Thank you. Jason, did you say Cassandra was on?
Yeah, Mayor, because CFO Raymond is in the meeting. If council had specific questions for her, we could get her upgraded.
Well, this is definitely good information, questions, and I will work with our finance department and come back.
Yeah.
Uh,
We'll try
If
to get Cassandra on here. Do you have any questions for her? In the meantime, Charla, do you have a question?
Not a question, just a comment, since it sounds like staff was looking at interest, and I just have to agree with Mr. Windish in terms of this being successful in other jurisdictions. Also, and given that Sumner is as small as it is, I don't think there's going to be an overwhelming number of applicants, but it is helpful. We just have so few tools, in part because of our size, ways for bringing in affordable housing. And so if we can get 1 or 2 projects out of this and also then show we're meeting legal requirements, I think like it's been a very successful program, but not an overwhelmingly successful program. So like in other words, we'll get a few projects that we want, but I think without taking a monstrous like financial hit. Anyway, so I'm definitely in favor of moving this forward and think we kind of have a responsibility to do it.
Thank you. We have Cassandra. Cassandra, would you like to put your foresight into this?
Thank you, Mayor. So Ryan and I have had some conversations. I'm happy, I'll work with CD and we'll come up with some additional financial calculations. We can certainly calculate the estimated impact to the other taxing districts. I think it's more difficult to calculate the operating impact down the line to taxing districts outside of our own, of course. You know, one of the things that Ryan and I have discussed at length is really where the value is in this. It's not necessarily the property tax, it's more in, you know, spurring the development around these areas. And there's some intrinsic value there. And then, of course, a lot of the financial impact, as Councilmember Newman just mentioned, will depend on the participation. The impact will be much different if we have 1 or 2 developers taking, taking the advantage of the opportunity versus multiple. So, you know, it's something that we'll certainly work to quantify those numbers and get some more detailed information. It'll be hard to pin down exactly, but we'll definitely come back with that information.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Stewart, did you have another question?
Just a comment, Mayor, thank you. I don't want to have this go out as me being against affordable housing, because I think it is absolutely necessary. And it sounds like it's going to be required by the state. But what I don't want to see is having any additional tax burden put on the taxpayers who already are paying a fair share of our revenues. And that might not have been said correctly, but the point is people are complaining about taxes, or complaining about cost of services going up. And I think before we automatically jump to the fact that, okay, we got to make up $70,000 of revenue, and so we'll take it here or there, that if we have to get to that point, then we end up should look at cutting services. I do not want to increase the tax burden on our taxpayers. Thank you.
Councilmember Hochstetter.
Thank you. I think it would be different for me if these units were completely made of affordable housing, but they're only required to lower the rent in 20% of them. That's a pretty small amount of units that would be at a better rent. But we're still going to be putting strain on our fire department, our school district, those sort of things, and also ourselves. And it's such a long term of years that we can't collect on the development that's happened. So I'm definitely for affordable housing, but I just don't think this is the right measure for us in the other parts of town. I like it close to the transportation where we have it, but the rest of it, I think we can just go with regular multifamily housing. So thank you.
Thank you. So seeing no more hands, Ryan, did you get what you needed? Kind of?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I'll work with Cassandra and we'll come back with some more financial specifics.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's move on to affordable senior housing regulations.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll introduce that one as well. This is also another priority that was identified by council as a result of our housing action plan. Last month, Senior Planner Ann Siegenthaler was here to discuss the proposed changes to senior housing. And tonight she's here to answer some questions, provide some additional clarity. And once again, we are looking for direction. This is actually on the agenda for 2 weeks from now for consideration, providing you guys still want to do that based on your comments tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Siegenthaler.
Great, thank you, Mr. Wilson. How is my volume? Is it okay for everyone? Not too loud though. Okay. I would like to go ahead and my screen share. Pardon me, just one moment. Is that visible to everyone?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Senior housing regulations. So we discussed this proposal on February 14th, and I won't go into again why senior housing is needed. We know that there's a gap here in Sumner as there is in other areas in Pierce County. Quickly, just an overview again of what the proposal is. We are trying to expand where affordable senior housing can be built in Sumner, and the proposal would require a planned residential development permit for senior housing. And that's really important because that's the mechanism that we have for managing the potential impacts like the increase in building height and the increase in density. So we have, and we can discuss each of the individual zones in more detail, but we have an increase in building height through the PRD. There's a requirement that 20% of the units be affordable, and the proposal would increase the density across all zones to 15 dwelling units per acre. Part of the proposal is updating the definitions for senior housing. It's really more of a cleanup in this part of the proposal, but I'm happy to answer questions on that if you have them. Changes that we're making across all zones for senior housing projects is we want to propose reducing the parking requirement. That's a significant cost reduction for affordable housing. And we'd like to be able to reduce the open space requirement, another cost savings. And I do want to clarify that these reductions are just for senior housing. They wouldn't apply to affordable housing or market rate housing. It's just for senior housing because those are different demographics, and the data shows they have different needs for parking and open space. Again, all senior housing would have to go through a PRD, and the minimum density, or excuse me, the minimum area would be a 1 acre site in low density residential or a ½ acre site in medium density residential. And that's one of the ways that we're proposing to help govern the impacts to particularly low density residential neighborhoods if we have some senior affordable housing developments come in. So again, density height increases would be allowed, but the developer has to address the impacts through the PRD. We're clarifying the PRD approval authority, cleaning up that approval process, and we're requiring a recorded covenant to ensure that the units are managed accordingly for the life of the project. So now I'd like to just go through each of the zones that we discussed last time. The yellow is low density residential. Dark brown is medium and high density residential, our multifamily zones. And then red is all of our commercial zones, neighborhood commercial and general commercial. So in low density residential zones, we're proposing to allow or to require 20% of the units to be affordable. And when we discussed this last time with the council, there were some questions, some concerns, I think, about whether that target is maybe too low. And could we possibly increase that affordability percentage to even say 30-35%? And I'd like to get some feedback from the council on this. Staff recommends we stay with a 20% affordability requirement. And the reason is that, well, there are a few reasons. One is that it's consistent with the Mfte that Mr. Windisch just touched on. That's a pretty common target in Mfte. And the 20% affordability rate is also pretty common in other cities that we looked at in the area. Different cities have different formulas. Some require maybe only 15% affordable units, but that's if you provide those units for very extremely low income. So there are different formulas, different approaches, but the most straightforward approach that I've seen in other cities is a 20% affordability requirement. The other concern about where to set that percentage is that Sumner just doesn't have the kind of market that some of the other cities have. So a city might require 35% affordable units, but their market might be a lot stronger than ours, and they wouldn't have any trouble getting that higher percentage. And the concern is if we set that percentage too high, we may not get anything in Sumner. We may drive the affordable housing developers elsewhere. Also, I wanted to just remind everyone that what we're targeting here with our affordability requirement is the senior housing providers that are going to also offer market rate units. Just because we set the rate at 20% doesn't mean we're not going to get more. We're very likely to get affordable housing providers like the Pierce County Housing Authority or the Salvation Army, and they're going to provide probably 100% affordable housing. That's their product, that's their mission. So just wanted to remind everyone that just because we mandate 20% doesn't mean we would not get more than that. So let me just back up and take a pulse check with the council. Any thoughts about the affordability percentage Does that feel about right to the council?
Anybody have any feedback for her? Councilmember Stewart.
Yes, I would agree with the 20% as a starting point. I think that's a good one.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Hochstetter.
Yes, I think I would that's something I don't, but she studies these things very well and I would trust her judgment.
Thank you. Councilmember Botetto.
Yes, I agree also. I think the 20% sounds good. And like she said, with the Salvation Army or other providers that do, affordable senior housing, they are allowed to go higher. So I think 20% is a good number.
Thank you. Anybody? Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. And I don't know if you're still going to address more about the zoning differences and locations, or would now be the time to ask questions about that?
Sure. What I'd like to do in these next couple of slides is try to address questions about the bulk and the density and the building height in the low density residential zone. Some questions came up about waiving the commercial ground floor requirement in our commercial zones. So my intention was to get into that in a little more detail with you, but if you'd like to ask questions now, that'd be fine.
No, that's fine. I'll wait until I'll hold my questions till after to see if they get answered along the way.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so the other question that we just mentioned is in the low density residential zones, staff is proposing 50 dwelling units per acre, and that's across all zones, and a 35-foot building height. So that would be an increase of 5 feet in the building height. So instead of a 2-story building in low density residential, it would allow 3-story buildings. And I know that's quite a leap. And I know there were some concerns from council that the bulk may just be too great for what people expect in their surrounding low density residential neighborhoods. Staff would recommend keeping the proposal as it is today. And the reason I believe that the bulk and height and density in the low density residential zones could be acceptable and manageable is that we have some criteria for managing that. So the projects would all go through the planned residential development process, which involves a public hearing. People can weigh in. It involves meeting some compatibility criteria before the project is approved. There's also, we have a 1 acre site minimum, 1 acre site minimum, which is intended to make sure that these projects aren't inserted into tight-knit single-family residential neighborhoods. So they have to have enough property around them in order to address the perimeter of the property and that relationship between the development and neighboring properties. And we discussed this a little bit more last time about the increased setbacks that we're proposing, where buildings that are taller than 30 foot, in other words, a 35-foot tall building would have to be set back. It ends up being about 50 feet from the surrounding single-family neighborhoods. So those are my reasons for recommending to you that we keep these criteria of 50 feet or 50 dwelling units per acre and a 35-foot height. But if the council has concerns, we could look at those two criteria. The difficulty about a building height at 30 feet is we won't ever get a 3-story senior affordable apartment building, and most newer apartment buildings are just not feasible at 2 stories. Given the land prices here, it's just going to be, I think, extremely difficult. And the 35-foot height it's 5 feet taller. And I was actually looking at this picture just before the meeting, and we're talking about almost a roof, the difference in roof height versus more of the difference in windows. So this is say a 2-story building here, like a 2-story house. And then this would be a 3-story senior apartment building. Of course, it wouldn't be set this close, but that will give you kind of an idea of the height. The windows are about as high as the existing single-family home. And then another possibility, if the council had concerns, is to reduce the density that we're proposing from 50 dwelling units per acre to 40. And it could help reduce the bulk of a project on a particular piece of property. And it's probably not going to create too much of a disincentive for senior housing, affordable housing providers. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that, what you think about the 35-foot building height and the 50 dwelling units per acre.
Okay, so let's give her some feedback here, Patrick.
So I think my same concern, and you guys might be able to help me with it, is I'm definitely in favor of more opportunities for senior housing. It's just some of the locations are what I have some concerns about. And part of that I mentioned in our last meeting was around folks that moved into residential low density neighborhoods specifically for that purpose, to experience that lifestyle, to then have a 3-story or 35-foot building put up potentially next door. And that's where I'm struggling, is the placement of these in the existing low density neighborhoods versus the areas we've already designated for apartments and for multifamily. Can you help me with that portion of it, or with the logic there?
Sure. One of the best things about the low density, well, two things I would say about that. One is to think about where we actually have low density residential sites that are at least an acre. There aren't that many of them. So we're really talking, the reason we wanted to open this to low density residential zones is that those are where the churches are, and those are where the public agencies have properties. So those are organizations, entities that are more likely to provide affordable senior housing. And I don't know if I can get my map, but they typically are larger sites. They typically have the means. They're already set up as providers of these types of community services. So to exclude low density residential zones from this, I believe we would be eliminating a large number of potential properties for really great, viable senior housing that are also located close to services, located close to downtown. So if you think of the churches on Valley Avenue, for example, those are some potential sites that I think could accommodate affordable senior housing. And we actually do have interest from Calvary Church to do just that. So they would not be able to build affordable senior apartments on their site. And St. Andrews also has quite a bit of room on their property. There are a couple of other low density residential sites more in the East Sumner neighborhood that are at least an acre, a couple acres even, that could be very, very good sites for low density residential. So that's where we.
So my question on that is it better to apply the senior housing across the board then, or focus it more toward the areas that would be conducive for building it? and look at possibly rezoning those to accommodate what it would look like.
I believe I understand what you're saying. So we could, so in addition to the criteria we have now, which are setback at least, it's going to be about 50 feet, which is almost the width of a public street. So I do want to say that a person wouldn't necessarily have a 3-story apartment right next door. It would be 50 feet away, almost, a street across, which is common in terms of where zoning will change from low density to medium density. So we have we have the setbacks, we have the minimum site, we have criteria in the PRD to ensure compatibility. The perimeter has to be addressed. The heights have to be compatible, or landscaping needs to be provided, and so on. So I think the criteria are there. If the council felt that those criteria were not enough, we could look at possibly designating a type of low density residential property. And I'm just going to throw something out. I had come up with some good options for you, but one option might be if we said public agency, publicly owned agency property, publicly owned properties in the low density residential, or we could establish a higher minimum site for properties, say 2 acres. Again, that would start to exclude some properties.
And my goal is not to exclude, and I appreciate that. It's not to exclude, but it's to focus. Focus that the areas that we think are potentials for this, and focus on setting those up to make them conductive for people to build them, as opposed to a blanket to all low density areas. I think that's kind of where I'm confused, or where you would think that if we already have an understanding of where these would fit, that we would then appropriately zone those areas or rezone those areas to accommodate it.
Sure, I think I understand the goal. I don't at the moment have a good proposal for accommodating that. We have to be careful about legal requirements of zoning and spot zoning. I could imagine we could look at some, like I say, additional criteria related to size, or related to a broader geographical area. And I see Mr. Windish might have some good ideas about this. Ryan, do you want to go ahead and weigh in?
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. So Councilmember Reed, I think you ask a good question. You look at the map, we've looked at the map, what's available in Sumner, what seems likely. Can we just zone those properties, multifamily, for example, and make it work there without without this particular proposal, right? I think the end game is the same though. Whether you're talking about multifamily as a zone, or you're talking about low density residential as a zone, the end game would be the same: a senior apartment development that's affordable. And what we're trying to do here is provide a permitting process, the planned residential development process, that would notify the neighborhood and give them a chance to weigh in on a design, and provide some criteria for a best fit scenario that we can manage, with limiting the number of units per acre and limiting the height to 35 feet, which you can squeeze 3 stories into 30 feet if you're careful about it. So 35 feet really is still pretty restrictive in terms of compatible with single family residential. And then this 50-foot setback is pretty extensive, honestly. And that's 50 feet for your 3-story buildings. And then the shorter buildings could be closer to that, fence line or setback. So I think the end result would be the same without the protracted process of trying to rezone properties through our comp plan and everything. And you're still providing the neighbors with notice, opportunity to comment, opportunity to weigh in on a design in this process. So that's.
And I do appreciate that's included, and that may actually be a way to answer a lot of my questions. I just, it's the unintended consequences that I'm thinking that a property that we may not have considered or thought of, or a developer purchases multiple properties and decides they want to put it on Ryan, or they want to put it, down in the downtown core residential area, after purchasing multiple properties to meet the acre requirement. It's things. Is it likely? Maybe, maybe not. But it's still, if the door's open, then it's possible.
Yes, you're right. I see what you're saying about that. It is possible that somebody could consolidate a number of properties to meet the minimum acreage, and then we have apartments in an area that the neighbors didn't expect. I think though that what Ryan and I are saying is that in the end, the actual project, whether it's on an existing 1 acre site or it's on a future 1 acre site, the end result is going to be the same. The criteria are going to be the same as far as setbacks and managing the bulk and the impact and the perimeter and the impact to the surrounding neighborhood.
Yeah, but it still allows it. And that's where, as long as they're meeting the conditions, it would still be allowed regardless of what the residents around it say.
Yes, that's the difference, is that if we say you could do this in the low density residential zone, if you meet these criteria, then they can build it. If they can show they meet the criteria through that public process, then they can build it.
They'd still be able to build. It just wouldn't be a surprise. They'd have to go through the notification and contact of their residents. And again, my end result is the same. I know we need more senior and low income senior housing and where to put them. I'm just trying to figure out in my mind where that balance is as the location wise. And that's what I'm still unsure at this point, but you guys have done a great job of trying to answer some of my questions with where we're at this point.
Are there any other council members that would like to put some input in?
And Mayor, just to finish with I don't know that I'm ready for this for next week or in 2 weeks, but I'll wait until we finish the rest of the questions and information as well.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes, and this is unlike me, but I'm all right with 35 feet. But I favor 40 units an acre instead of 50. That's my opinion.
And Mr. Brown, if I could just clarify to make sure I understood. So you would support a 40 dwelling units per acre versus 50 units per acre.
Yeah.
And the building height, 35 feet, if I understood, you said that you'd be okay with that?
That's right, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm right on board with Kurt. 35 feet height is fine with me, and I prefer the 40 dwelling units per acre. But I also had a question, and what makes these affordable? Does that mean that they're cheaper built, or just how would you define affordability there?
Well, affordable is actually a consistent term. It has less to do with how they are built, although that I'm sure is a factor in the providers who build these. But the affordability definition goes back to what Mr. Windisch was pointing to in his presentation. There's a certain AMI in the county, and if you build affordable units, you have to be targeting low income and moderate income people. And those low and moderate income households are defined as having an AMI that's within a certain percentage, or having an income that's within a certain percentage of the county AMI. So, so that would be spelled out. It's actually in the proposed code. Excuse me. The definition of affordable housing is linked back to our existing MFTE code in Chapter 3, Title 3. And but affordable also has to do with how a provider can make the units affordable and how a project becomes feasible. So that's why we're trying to look at reducing costs, such as parking and open space, so on.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you answered that very well. You sort of read into my question, but a lot more than I meant. But anyway, I appreciate the work you've done on this, and I think it's good to go based on what I said. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cole.
I just wanted to say that I think affordable housing for seniors in particular would be fantastic for Sumner. I am in favor of the 35-foot building height. But I am concerned, though. I mean, there are different levels of mobility for seniors. And I wanted to confirm, and I think when you presented last time that there would be elevators, or if there were a 3-story building, an elevator would be a part of that. And would that be like mandatory?
So yes, I understand your question. That's not something that the city would require. Those are state requirements through the International Building Code, and and developers, they're pretty familiar with those codes, and affordable housing providers are extremely familiar with those. And there are some accessibility requirements built in that code. I do not know what those are, but in terms of providing ground floor units, a certain percentage of ground floor units, ADA accessible, layout, design, construction, bathrooms, ADAs, parking stalls, and so on. There are some requirements like that. Our city code doesn't spell that out. That's handled at the state level.
Okay. Yes, and okay, sorry. And for me, whether it's 40 dwelling units per acre or 50 dwelling units per acre, that wouldn't be an issue for me. But I fully support more senior housing.
Thank you. Councilmember Botetto.
Yeah, I think the 35 feet is fine. And then, do you have any idea how many units are in the Stafford Suites?
74, I think.
And that's probably is that on more than an acre?
Yes, it is. It is, I'm not sure if I had the data up here. It's probably a couple of acres. It's definitely more. Ryan probably knows.
But
yeah, thank you. Thank you. And it's more than an acre, but I would like to point out that assisted living has a different dwelling unit per acre. In fact, they're not even considered dwelling units because they don't have a lot of the units anyway. I haven't been in there personally, but a lot of the units aren't going to have any kitchen facility.
Right.
And so there's common dining. And so those are not even counted as technically as dwelling units, not to get parsing it down here too far. But so assisted living is in its own category in terms of of that. But if you want some idea, yeah, there's 72, I think, units in Stafford Suites. It's obviously 3 stories, one big building, and I think it's on 2.5 acres. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, thank you. But so I'd go between the 40 or 50 units, because I think, if we get somebody to invest in senior housing in Sumner, we have to make the most of their investment. So I'd go with the 35 feet and probably 50 units.
Thank you. All right, anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that feedback, council members. Then I'd like to talk about multifamily zones, medium density residential and high density residential. Same kinds of questions here. We're proposing 20% of the units to be affordable. Any concerns about that 20% for medium density residential? And the reason this comes up is, again, it's this question: are we aiming too low with our affordability requirement? We could, in a higher density designation like this, we could probably ask for a higher percentage of affordable units. But it adds a level of complexity to the code, which may put off some developers. I'm not entirely sure about that. But I think the main reason that staff would recommend staying at the 20% is that the higher the requirement, of course, the more disincentive it is for housing providers. And so if we would rather have senior apartments directed toward multifamily zones rather than directed toward low density residential zones, I would say keep the percentage of affordability at 20% and not create a disincentive in our multifamily zones. So in other words, low density residential zones and medium density residential zones, all the residential zones would have the same requirement for affordability, and it would be kind of an even playing field, and developers then could determine which site in which zones works best for them. Any concerns about that, about 20% or perhaps going to a higher percentage?
Councilmember Botetto, did you have a question or a comment?
No.
Okay. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. Contrary to my previous comments, when it comes to multifamily residential zones and commercial zones, I do agree with the full process and keeping it at the 20%. I'm perfectly fine with that. It's just the low density that I have some concerns with.
Any other comments? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I'm good to go with the 20%. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think
We good? Okay.
All right. Did you get what you needed, Ann?
I did. We're almost there. Thank you. Commercial zones. Again, the affordability mandate, we propose to keep that in our residential zones and to allow the affordability to be an optional in commercial zones. If there's any concern about that, I'd ask the council to let me know. But the thinking here again is that we want to have some areas of the city that are not constrained by the affordability requirement. It just provides another avenue for housing providers to find a suitable site and create a feasible project somewhere in the city. So we'd like to keep that as unconstrained, the commercial zones as unconstrained as possible. Any questions about that?
Councilmember Reed? No?
I
Sorry,
will
forgot to
just,
take it down.
I know Councilmember Reed had questions about the commercial ground floor requirement and waiving that. So I'll just get into that. We heard from affordable housing providers, senior housing providers, that the ground floor commercial requirement currently in our code is a real impediment to senior housing. And it just translates to cost. I mean, we hear this from our market rate housing providers as well. So we would recommend waiving the commercial ground floor requirement. Now that isn't in every commercial zone everywhere throughout the city. Under this proposal, we still keep the ground floor commercial in the East Sumner neighborhood commercial zone. And that's in the area around the windmill site, 160th and East Main or 60th. So there are some neighborhood commercial zones along the streets in East Sumner that are going to provide some pedestrian-oriented commercial services. So we want to keep the ground floor commercial there. We also are not allowing apartments at all in East Sumner in the general commercial zone that's south of 64th Street. So there's quite a large area there that would be required to have commercial ground floor. And then in looking at, asking the question, well, what else is left in terms of our commercial zones? There are very few other large sites that are undeveloped or underdeveloped that that we would have to be concerned about. But an option would be if the council is uncomfortable with waiving that ground floor commercial requirement, one of the things we could do is target on what I believe is probably the most important area, and that would be Main Street and East Main Street. So one option I wanted to ask the council about is, would you first of all be comfortable waiving the ground floor commercial requirement in all of our commercial zones? And again, this is just for affordable senior housing. If you're not comfortable with that, what do you think about this option of keeping the ground floor commercial requirement along East Main? So everything, in other words, everything from Valley Avenue over to Sumner Taps Highway. And to give you some idea of what kind of sites this might encompass, we'd still have a general commercial zone on Parker Road and Graham, so to the north and east of the Lawson Fred Meyer. That area in there could have senior apartments, which would be a great place, close to downtown and transit. And it would also keep most of East Sumner general commercial zone open to senior apartments. So this might be a good compromise if you're comfortable with that. So any thoughts on that or concerns?
Have any feedback for her on that?
I see. Just a minute.
Reed?
Yeah, I do like option A on keeping it on Main and East Main. And I'm also okay with the convertible. I'm assuming that's what you meant, is that the ground floor would have to have the option of convertible versus strictly commercial, or was that not part of the original?
No, that's not part of the staff proposal. There is thinking now that's a very confusing requirement for developers and for staff. So in the current proposal, when we say waive the ground floor commercial, we mean you can put apartments on the ground floor and we'll call it apartments, and they open up and rent as apartments, not a transitional type of unit. So yes, we would totally waive the commercial ground floor requirement. But if the council likes option A, we would keep the ground floor commercial requirement along Main Street. And at least under this proposal, we would hold the line there. There wouldn't be a transitional option. along East Main for, at least for senior housing.
And I do like that on the street facing properties in my opinion. And I'm more open to the other ones being waived if it's off of Main, or I just thinking of long-term economic development and opportunities. Once the apartments are built, there's no longer an opportunity for providing other services in those areas. So I would be in favor of option A for myself.
Thank you. Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Hochstetter.
So, Ann, I just need you to explain a few more things to me on the summary of changes by zone. That's what you're on. The proposal keeps ground floor commercial in East Sumner. What is that? NC, non-commercial?
I'm sorry, that's neighborhood commercial.
Neighborhood commercial keeps. Okay, so just go over those points for me again in your original. That's what you're recommending, and then you're saying there might be this one change if we want it. So explain what you were first asking for again for me. I'm sorry.
I think the first of all, there's a goal. We'll just say that the goal is to try to preserve our commercial zones for commercial uses. So allowing senior housing on the ground floor is a giveaway. We're going to lose some of our commercial areas, but under the current proposal, we would keep the ground floor commercial in the East Sumner neighborhood commercial zone. So we have two zones, neighborhood commercial and general commercial. In East Sumner along 160th and Main Street, where we have neighborhood commercial zoning right now, we wouldn't allow any apartments to go in on the ground floor. So that's one area. It's not a huge area of the city, but it's one area where we would keep the commercial on the ground floor. Another area is in East Sumner in the general commercial zone that's located south of 64th. That's a lot of acreage in that area. And we would also require that the ground floor remain as commercial in that area as well. That's under the current proposal. Now, if the council thinks that we shouldn't open up general commercial zoning elsewhere in the city to senior apartments on the ground floor, then one thing we could do to kind of find a middle ground and keep some more of our general commercial ground floor at the street would be to focus on Main Street and say that's off limits. You can't put senior apartments on the ground floor along Main Street. Does that make more sense, or is that still confusing?
You're muted.
I think the internet was not working quite right, so there was a few losses in there. But
I'm sorry.
I guess my question is, how successful has this ground floor commercial been? I hate to just see things sit empty. There for a few years, it seemed like everything I saw built that was not successful. Has that picked up a little bit more, Ann, from what you see out there?
It is, and I think Mr. Windish might have some thoughts about this as well, but there is some change happening in the market. So for example, we have the Main Plus Lofts apartment building on Main Street. They have a commercial use on the ground floor, and that sat empty. The developer said we'll never get commercial there, but now there's the Top Down Brewery, and they're always busy, and so we're seeing some changes like that. We have the Nemeth Apartments coming in East Sumner. They're going to provide actual ground floor commercial. So it is happening. I think we still are going to have some empty space sitting there for a while. Our market hasn't totally flipped to the point where developers are just excited about building ground floor retail. It's a difficult market for that right now.
Okay, I also wonder about a ground floor. Is that feasible to have apartments right on the street level, right on the ground floor? Or is that just, do you see what I mean? I just mean, I can see them up above, but I don't know were people ever comfortable living right on the sidewalk along that as their homes?
You know, I can think of the best example in Sumner would be the Washington Market or the Main Plus Lofts, that newer apartment building. They're just east of Fred Meyer. Those are apartments on the ground floor, right up at the street. They do have some separation with some patios and some railings and so forth, but they really are right at the street. And as far as I know, they're all rented. The developer couldn't get them built fast enough. They were mostly sold or rented already, even the ground floor units before they were built. So there is a market for that. I don't know the demographics, but there is a market for that at the ground floor.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for your best efforts on answering my questions.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in favor of option A. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I see no more hands. Ann, or
Okay. Right. These were just some density examples, and I am finished with my presentation discussion. And again, what we'd like to do, I really appreciate your feedback tonight. This was really helpful. We're hoping to come back and talk with the council again in March. And I understand there are still some questions. So we'll need to have another discussion. It sounds like in March, and try to come back to you then in April if we can.
okay.
Mayor, may I ask a
Yeah.
clarifying question? You know, I've been keeping notes as we go along here, and I feel like we are at a point where we could bring this back to council for consideration. You know, there's a couple options that we can work through. So I'd propose that we actually keep this on the agenda in 2 weeks based on your comments tonight. Please look it over. If you see something that you want a prepared amendment on, work with staff so we can get that prepared ahead of the meeting. But what I heard on the LDR was general consensus that everybody's okay with 35-foot height, as well as 40 dwelling units per acre. The MDR and HDR, you're good with the 20%, as well as the bulk and densities. And then on the commercial zone, I heard at least 2, and I saw a third that are wanting to keep the commercial on Main and East Main. So I believe I'm getting a head nod from Ryan and Ann too. It looks like that's what they heard. So that's how we will prepare the ordinance.
All right.
And if you have changes, please work with staff ahead of time.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Ann. Patrick, did you have one more?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question for Jason's comments. So if, for example, I wanted to propose an amendment to remove LDR from that group, then that could just be presented along with when it comes back in 2 weeks.
Certainly, just reach out to Ms. Siegenthaler so she can draft that amendment for you. And
okay.
You can do that.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Newman.
I'm wondering if we could perhaps keep 50 units as the baseline recommendation, and someone, if they're interested, to offer amendment for the 40 units. I'm concerned that if we narrow the units too low, that people may not build. And I think, and especially since senior housing is relatively low impact anyway, I guess I would like to make it as easy for the market to want to, like, for developers to want to build that senior housing as possible. So, and other council members may disagree, but I'm wondering, like, whatever, and I don't care if, or like, if you do the baseline 40, then I can offer an amendment for 50, or baseline 50 and amendment for 40. But I kind of didn't want to, I understand that some people have like, are comfortable with 40, but I didn't want to take 50 off the table of discussion.
That sounds good. So you can reach out to staff and figure out which way to go.
Okay.
All right. All right.
Mayor Hayden, I'm sorry, may I ask a clarifying question? I heard, I believe 2 council members suggest that 40 dwelling units per acre would be preferable. So shall we go ahead and prepare an amendment for 40 dwelling units? Keep it at 50 and prepare an amendment for 40? Mr. Brown is saying no.
So you mean put it at 40 and then have Charlotte make the amendment for 50?
Well, I did not hear objection to 50 dwelling units per acre, but I heard 2 council members suggest 40. So I thought, I'm asking if I should go ahead and keep it at 50, the ordinance as it is at 50 dwelling units per acre, and then we can prepare an amendment for 40 to be voted on.
Sounds good to me.
Well, I feel like you
Hochstetter?
asked for feedback and you got feedback that 2 people said they wanted, and that's also what I'm in favor of, and didn't say anything because
Okay.
you were moving forward with that. So I think we should stick with that and then have it amended by someone. That's my input.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, Anne, what would you prefer? I mean, we had 3
Sure.
members. Ryan?
Well, it sounds like either way, we have a potential amendment on the table to vote on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I would prefer we go with the 50 and provide an amendment at 40.
Okay.
I would prefer the other way because 3 people favored 40, 1 favored 50.
Okay.
Well, we can do it that way if that's.
Yeah.
I'm happy either way.
I'm happy too.
So we'll do 50 in the ordinance, 40 in the ordinance, and an amendment to go to 50.
Sounds great. Love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I am seeing nothing more. I think. What's that? Oh, Councilmember Potato, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I did say 50, and I think Charlotte did as well. So, but I don't know about the others.
It's all right. We got it all straightened out. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to say this meeting is adjourned.